My name is Edith, and I'm 52 years old, living here in suburban Minneapolis. I thought Mother's Day would be different this year. After raising my son Marcus alone for the past 15 years, I figured he'd finally understand what the day meant to me. Boy, was I wrong. What started as excited anticipation for a family dinner turned into the most humiliating night of my life. I found myself washing dishes until 2 in the morning while being criticized for my efforts. But sometimes the biggest heartbreaks lead to the most important awakenings. Before I tell you what happened, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like button. You won't believe how this story ends and how one calm conversation changed everything between my son and me forever. Let me paint you the picture of how I got to this point. 15 years ago, when my husband David passed away from a sudden heart attack, I was left to raise Marcus on my own. He was just 13 then, still my little boy, who needed his mom for everything. Those early years were tough, I won't lie to you. I worked as an administrative assistant during the week and picked up weekend catering jobs just to keep us afloat and pay for Marcus's college dreams. I threw myself into being both mother and father to that boy. Every soccer game, every school play, every late-night homework session. When he graduated high school as valedictorian, I cried harder than he did. When he got into the University of Minnesota, I worked 3 jobs that summer to help with expenses. I was so proud watching him walk across that stage 4 years later with his business degree. For years, Marcus was everything I could have hoped for in a son. Respectful, caring, always checking in on his old mom. He'd call me twice a week, stop by for Sunday dinners, and never forgot my birthday or Mother's Day. We had this beautiful relationship built on mutual respect and genuine love. But things started changing about 2 years ago when he met Jessica. She was 25, worked in marketing, and had this way about her that I couldn't quite put my finger on at first. She was polite enough when they came to dinner, but I noticed how she'd make little comments about my decorating choices or suggest improvements to my cooking. Marcus would just laugh it off, calling her particular. The real shift happened when Marcus moved in with Jessica last year. Suddenly, our weekly dinners became monthly visits, and those monthly visits started including Jessica's opinions about everything. She had thoughts about how I should update my kitchen, what kind of car I should drive, even how I should spend my retirement savings. The worst part was watching Marcus start to echo her comments. Jessica seemed to view me as some kind of free service. When they needed someone to watch her sister's kids during their anniversary weekend, guess who got the call? When Jessica wanted to host a dinner party but didn't want to clean her apartment beforehand, suddenly they needed to use my house. Each time Marcus would present it like he was doing me a favor by including me in their lives. I started noticing how Jessica would make subtle digs about my lifestyle. Comments about how nice it must be to have so much free time in retirement, or how she could never live in such an outdated house. Marcus never defended me, just changed the subject, or worse, sometimes agreed with her observations. The pattern became clear. I was useful to them when they needed something, but I wasn't really valued as a person anymore. Still, I told myself that this was just part of Marcus growing up, finding his place with his girlfriend. I kept hoping that eventually Jessica would warm up to me and we could build a real relationship. When Marcus called me 3 weeks before Mother's Day to suggest hosting dinner at my place, I was genuinely excited. Finally, an intimate family celebration where we could reconnect. I should have known something was off when he mentioned bringing Jessica, but I figured it was only natural since they were living together now. Then came the text message that should have been my first real warning. 2 days before Mother's Day, Marcus sent me a casual message that made my stomach drop. Jessica's family was in town, and they were excited to meet me, so could they join our dinner? What had been planned as a quiet celebration for 3 had suddenly become hosting 8 people I'd never met. I stared at that text for a long time, feeling the familiar pattern of my own needs being pushed aside for everyone else's convenience. But I told myself that maybe this was an opportunity to finally connect with Jessica's family, to become part of their circle. I spent the next 2 days shopping, cleaning, and preparing my house for what I hoped would be a lovely Mother's Day celebration. Mother's Day morning started with such promise. I woke up early feeling that familiar flutter of excitement I always got on special occasions. The sun was streaming through my kitchen windows as I started my prep work, and I actually found myself humming while I arranged fresh flowers from my garden in the vase David had given me years ago. I'd planned everything so carefully. A honey-glazed ham as the centerpiece, roasted vegetables, homemade dinner rolls, and my famous chocolate cake for dessert. I wanted everything to be perfect, especially since I'd be meeting Jessica's family for the first time. I even pulled out my good china, the set my mother had left me, thinking it would make the day feel more special. Marcus arrived at 2 in the afternoon, and right away I could tell something was different about his energy. Instead of his usual warm hug and "Happy Mother's Day, Mom," he gave me a quick kiss on the cheek and immediately started rearranging my living room furniture. Jessica followed behind him, already making observations about how we should set up the space for optimal conversation flow. But it was when the car doors kept slamming outside that I realized the true scope of what I'd gotten myself into. Jessica's parents, Robert and Patricia, walked in like they owned the place. Patricia immediately commented on how quaint my house was, in that tone that made quaint sound like a polite way of saying outdated. Robert barely acknowledged me, instead walking straight to my thermostat and asking if I could turn up the air conditioning because he ran hot. Then came Jessica's brother Kevin with his wife Amanda and their 2 kids, ages 6 and 8. The children immediately started running through my house picking up my decorative items, while their parents settled into my living room without offering to help with anything. I watched one of the kids grab my crystal bird figurine, the one David had brought me from our honeymoon, and my heart nearly stopped. Marcus, instead of introducing me as the honored guest on Mother's Day, started playing host in my own home. He was getting drinks for everyone, making conversation, acting like this was his house, and I was simply the hired help who happened to live there. When Jessica's mother asked about appetizers, Marcus called out to me in the kitchen, "Mom, do you have those cheese and crackers ready?" I felt my first real stab of hurt when I overheard Patricia talking to Amanda in my living room. "Well, at least she's useful for something," Patricia said with a laugh. Jessica was worried about Marcus's mother being one of those demanding types, but it looks like she knows her place. The comment hit me like a physical blow, but I just kept slicing cheese and arranging crackers, telling myself I'd misheard. The afternoon progressed with me running back and forth from the kitchen while everyone else relaxed in my living room. Every time I'd try to join the conversation, someone would need something else. More wine, different napkins. Could I adjust the temperature again? Did I have any music that wasn't so old-fashioned? Jessica seemed to be directing traffic, sending me on various errands while she held court with her family. When I suggested we might want to start thinking about dinner since it was getting late, Jessica announced that her family preferred to eat later, around 8, so could I keep everything warm until then? 4 more hours of hosting while being treated like staff in my own home. The worst part was watching Marcus go along with all of it. My son, who I'd raised to be respectful and considerate, was treating me like I was invisible. When I tried to sit down for a moment to join the conversation about their recent vacation, Marcus immediately asked if I could check on the rolls in the oven. When I mentioned that the ham needed to rest, he suggested I use that time to set up the dining room. By 6 o'clock I was exhausted, and my feet were killing me, but I kept telling myself that dinner would be better. Once we were all sitting around the table together, surely the dynamic would shift, and I could actually be part of the celebration instead of just the person making it happen. When dinner time finally arrived, I felt a surge of pride as I brought out the spread I'd worked so hard to prepare. The ham was perfectly glazed, the vegetables were roasted to golden perfection, and my homemade rolls were still warm from the oven. For just a moment, as everyone gathered around my dining room table, I thought maybe the evening was about to turn around. That hope lasted exactly 5 minutes. Patricia took one bite of the ham and immediately reached for the salt shaker, making a face like she'd tasted something unpleasant. "It's quite salty," she announced to the table. "I have to watch my sodium intake for my blood pressure." Robert chimed in that the vegetables seemed overcooked, and Kevin wondered aloud why there weren't more vegetarian options since his wife Amanda was trying to eat less meat. Jessica, instead of defending the meal, or at least acknowledging my effort, started apologizing to her family for the menu choices. "I told Marcus we should have planned this better," she said, looking directly at me. Maybe next time we can coordinate the menu ahead of time so everyone's dietary needs are considered. Marcus, my own son, nodded along like this made perfect sense. Mom's always been more of a traditional cook, he said, as if that was somehow a criticism. She doesn't really keep up with all the new dietary trends. I sat there in stunned silence, watching my Mother's Day dinner get picked apart by people who hadn't lifted a finger to help prepare it. When I suggested there was a nice salad in the refrigerator for anyone who wanted lighter fare, Amanda said she'd noticed it earlier, but it had regular dressing on it, not the vinaigrette she preferred. The conversation moved on to topics that excluded me entirely. Jessica's family talked about their recent European vacation, their investment properties, their children's private school achievements. Every time I tried to contribute something to the conversation, it was either ignored or met with polite but dismissive responses. Then came the incident that nearly broke me completely. Jessica's nephew, the 6-year-old, was drinking grape juice at my formal dining table, despite my suggesting that maybe water would be safer near the good linens. Patricia had overruled me, saying the child was perfectly capable of being careful. Of course, within minutes, the entire glass of dark purple juice went flying across my antique lace tablecloth. The tablecloth had been my grandmother's, passed down to my mother, and then to me. David and I had used it for every special occasion during our marriage, and I'd carefully preserved it through all these years. Watching that dark stain spread across the delicate fabric, I felt tears spring to my eyes. But before I could even react, Jessica was already minimizing the situation. "Oh, it's just fabric," she said with a dismissive wave. "Don't be so dramatic about it. Things like this happen when you have kids around." The word dramatic hit me like a slap. I wasn't being dramatic. I was watching a precious family heirloom get ruined and feeling heartbroken about it. But somehow in Jessica's version of events, I was the problem for caring about something that had deep sentimental value. Marcus, instead of comforting his mother or acknowledging that this was something important to me, actually echoed Jessica's sentiment. "Mom, accidents happen," he said in that patronizing tone you'd use with a child having a tantrum. "Don't make a scene over it. It's just a tablecloth." Just a tablecloth. This piece of fabric that connected me to 3 generations of women in my family was just a tablecloth to my son. I excused myself to get cleaning supplies, and when I returned, the conversation had moved on like nothing had happened. No apology from the parents, no offer to pay for cleaning, no acknowledgement that something meaningful to me had been damaged. As dinner continued, I found myself retreating further and further into silence. Every bite felt like swallowing glass as I listened to my son and his girlfriend's family continue to diminish and dismiss me in my own home. When dessert time came, Patricia announced that she couldn't eat chocolate cake because it was too rich, and could I possibly make some fresh fruit salad instead? By the time dinner ended, I felt like a ghost in my own house. Everyone else moved to the living room for after-dinner drinks and conversation, leaving me staring at a table full of dirty dishes, stained linens, and the remnants of what was supposed to be my special day. That's when Marcus delivered the final blow. As the dinner guests settled into my living room with their wine and conversation, I stood alone in my dining room surveying the damage. Dirty plates, stacked high serving dishes that needed soaking wine glasses with lipstick stains, and that purple stain spreading across my grandmother's tablecloth like a bruise on my heart. I started clearing the table, moving mechanically from dining room to kitchen, scraping plates and loading the dishwasher. Through the doorway, I could hear the animated conversation in the living room, laughter, and stories being shared, the kind of warm family atmosphere I'd dreamed this day would have. But I wasn't part of it. I was the cleanup crew. Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway around 10:30, not to help, but to grab another bottle of wine from my refrigerator. He noticed me elbow-deep in soapy water scrubbing the ham pan, and instead of offering to help or sending some of his guests to assist, he made an announcement that cut me to my core. "Mom doesn't mind cleaning up," he called out to the living room loud enough for everyone to hear. "She likes to stay busy. It makes her feel useful." Feel useful. Like I was some kind of pet that needed a job to justify my existence. I stopped scrubbing and looked at my son, this man I'd raised to be kind and respectful and barely recognized him. But he wasn't finished yet. Jessica appeared beside him, wine glass in hand, and added her own commentary. "My mother never does dishes on holidays," she said with a laugh that sounded more like a brag. "That's what the hostess is for. She gets to enjoy her own party while someone else handles the grunt work." The grunt work. My Mother's Day celebration had been reduced to grunt work in my own son's mind. I wanted to say something to stand up for myself, to point out how wrong this all was. But the words just wouldn't come. Instead, I nodded and smiled, playing the role they'd assigned me. The evening dragged on with me as the invisible servant and everyone else as the entertained guests. The children made more messes, dropping crumbs on my carpet and leaving sticky fingerprints on my coffee table. When I brought out wet wipes to clean up after them, Amanda actually thanked me for being so attentive to detail. Around midnight, Jessica's family finally started gathering their things to leave. I waited for someone to offer to help finish the kitchen, or at least thank me for the meal and the hospitality. Instead, Patricia commented on what a lovely evening it had been, and how nice it was to see Marcus with such a thoughtful girlfriend who knew how to organize family gatherings. Kevin shook Marcus's hand and told him what a great host he'd been. Robert mentioned that they should do this again soon, maybe for Father's Day. Not one person thanked me directly or acknowledged that I'd done anything beyond what was expected of the hired help. As the door closed behind Jessica's family, I thought finally Marcus and Jessica would help me finish cleaning up. After all, it was well past midnight. I'd been on my feet all day, and there were still pots soaking in the sink and wine glasses scattered around the living room. But instead of rolling up their sleeves to help, they settled back onto my couch and continued their conversation about how well the evening had gone. I continued washing dishes, my feet aching in my dress shoes, my back screaming from bending over the sink for hours. Around 1 a.m, Jessica started giving me directions from the couch. "Those wine glasses need to be hand-washed," she called out. "And make sure you get all the lipstick marks off. I noticed some spots earlier." Marcus added his own supervision from across the room. "Mom, you missed a spot on that serving platter. See there where the gravy was?" I was being critiqued on my cleaning performance at 1 a.m. on Mother's Day, by my own son and his girlfriend, in my own kitchen, while they sat comfortably giving me orders like I was domestic staff who wasn't meeting their standards. The final insult came as I was drying the last of the good china around 2 a.m. My hands were pruned from the hot, soapy water, my feet were throbbing, and I was so tired I could barely stand. Jessica stretched and yawned from the couch, then looked at Marcus with a satisfied smile. "Thanks, Mom," Marcus said, not even getting up to look at my work. "This worked out great. Jessica's family wants to do this again for Father's Day. They really loved your house and how well you handled everything." Handled everything. Like I was event staff who'd successfully executed someone else's party. But Jessica wasn't finished delivering blows to my wounded heart. "Next time, though," she added casually, "maybe spring for better wine. My dad mentioned that the bottle we had with dinner was a little cheap tasting." I stood there at 2 a.m, holding my great-grandmother's china plate, listening to my son's girlfriend criticize the wine I'd bought with my limited budget for a party I'd been volunteered to host and forced to serve. The wine that had cost me $40, which was a stretch on my fixed income, was cheap tasting, according to people who hadn't contributed a single dollar to the meal. After they finally left around 2:15, I found myself completely alone in my kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of what should have been a beautiful Mother's Day celebration. I looked at the photo of David that sits on my kitchen windowsill, the one from our last Mother's Day together, and I started to cry. Not just tears of exhaustion or disappointment, but deep, soul-wrenching sobs for the relationship I'd lost with my son, for the disrespect I'd allowed myself to endure, and for the realization that somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being Marcus's mother and become his unpaid servant. I woke up the next morning feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. Every muscle in my body ached from the hours of standing and cleaning, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional devastation I felt. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the previous day, trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. The house was eerily quiet after all the chaos of the night before. I could see my dining room from my bedroom doorway, and the morning sunlight was highlighting the purple stain on my grandmother's tablecloth, which I'd left spread across the table like evidence of a crime scene. I made my way to the kitchen to start coffee, and that's when the full reality of what had happened really hit me. The kitchen was spotless, because I'd spent until 2 in the morning making it that way. But everything felt different now. This house, which had always been my sanctuary, felt violated somehow. These rooms where David and I had built our life together, where I'd raised Marcus with so much love and intention, had been turned into a stage for my own humiliation. As I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee, I started thinking about the patterns I'd been enabling. When had I stopped being a person deserving of respect and become just a resource for Marcus to utilize? When had I agreed to be treated like hired help in my own home? The phone rang around 9:30, and when I saw Dorothy's name on the caller ID, I almost didn't answer. Dorothy had been my best friend since our kids were in elementary school together, and she'd watched the gradual changes in my relationship with Marcus over the past 2 years. I knew she'd ask about Mother's Day, and I wasn't sure I could talk about it without breaking down completely. But Dorothy has always been persistent, and she knew me well enough to sense when something was seriously wrong. "Edith, honey," she said as soon as I answered. "How was your Mother's Day? Did Marcus do something special for you?" The genuine concern in her voice opened the floodgates, and everything came pouring out. I told her about the surprise guests, the constant demands, the criticism of my cooking, the ruined tablecloth, and finally about washing dishes until 2 in the morning while being supervised and critiqued by my own son. Dorothy listened without interrupting, but I could hear her getting more and more upset on my behalf. When I finished my story, there was a long pause before she spoke. "Edith," she said finally, "honey, you didn't raise a son. You raised a king who thinks you're his servant." Those words hit me like a lightning bolt. A king who thinks you're his servant. That's exactly what Marcus had become, and I'd been so busy trying to maintain our relationship that I'd allowed myself to be demoted to staff in his kingdom. Dorothy didn't stop there. "Do you remember when our kids were little, and we used to talk about what kind of men we were raising? We wanted them to be respectful, kind, and grateful. When was the last time Marcus showed you genuine gratitude or respect?" I couldn't answer because I honestly couldn't remember. Somewhere along the way, my efforts had become expected rather than appreciated. My sacrifices had become obligations rather than gifts, and my needs had become inconveniences rather than priorities. "You've got to stop this pattern," Dorothy continued. "Every time you accept this treatment, you're teaching him that it's okay to treat you this way. You're not doing him any favors by letting him be this kind of person." After we hung up, I spent the morning doing something I hadn't done in years. I put myself first. I took a long hot bath with Epsom salts for my aching muscles. I made myself a real breakfast, not just coffee and toast on the run. I sat in my garden and listened to the birds trying to reconnect with who I was before I became Marcus's convenient mother. I also did some research online about setting boundaries with adult children. I read articles about enabling behaviors, about the difference between helping and being used, about maintaining dignity in family relationships. What I discovered was that I wasn't alone. Thousands of parents, especially mothers, had found themselves in similar situations where their adult children had learned to take advantage of their willingness to sacrifice. By noon, I'd made a decision. I was going to have a conversation with Marcus, a real conversation about respect and boundaries, and what our relationship needed to look like going forward. This wasn't about punishment or anger. It was about saving our relationship before it was completely destroyed by this toxic dynamic. When Marcus called around 12:30, his tone was casual and light, like nothing significant had happened the day before. He started the conversation by thanking me again for hosting dinner, telling me that Jessica's family had really enjoyed meeting me. Then he dropped the bomb I was somehow expecting, but still wasn't prepared for. "Actually, Mom," he said, "Jessica thinks maybe we should make Mother's Day dinner at your place an annual tradition. Her family really loved your house, and it's so much easier than trying to find a restaurant that can accommodate everyone's preferences. What do you think? What did I think? I thought he'd lost his mind if he believed I would ever put myself through that again. But instead of exploding, I took a deep breath and used the calm, steady voice I'd been practicing all morning. "Marcus," I said, "we need to talk. Can you come over this afternoon? We need to have a serious conversation about what happened yesterday." I could hear the confusion in his voice. This wasn't the response he'd expected. He was used to me being agreeable, accommodating, always saying yes to whatever he needed. "Is everything okay, Mom? You sound kind of serious." "Everything is not okay," I replied. "But it can be fixed if we talk honestly. Can you be here around 3?" He agreed, though I could tell he was puzzled by my tone. As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, powerful. Not angry or vindictive, but clear about my own worth and ready to stand up for it. When Marcus knocked on my door at 3 o'clock that afternoon, I could see through the window that he'd come alone. Good. This conversation needed to happen without Jessica's influence or commentary. As I opened the door, I noticed he looked uncertain, like he was trying to read my mood, and couldn't quite figure out what was happening. "Hi, Mom," he said, giving me his usual quick hug. "Is everything all right? You sounded really serious on the phone." I led him into the living room and gestured for him to sit down. I'd spent the past 2 hours preparing for this conversation, not with anger or accusations, but with clarity about what needed to be said. I'd even written down key points so I wouldn't get emotional and lose track of my message. "Marcus," I began, sitting across from him rather than next to him on the couch, "I want to talk to you about yesterday, and I need you to really listen to what I'm saying." He immediately went into defensive mode, which told me everything I needed to know about his awareness of how the day had gone. "Mom, if this is about the tablecloth, I'm sorry about that. Kids have accidents. I thought you handled it really well." Handled it really well. There was that phrase again, like I was staff being evaluated on my performance. "This isn't about the tablecloth, Marcus, though that's part of it. This is about how I was treated in my own home on Mother's Day and how you participated in that treatment." I could see him getting ready to interrupt, so I held up my hand to stop him. "Yesterday was the last time I will be treated like hired help in my own home," I said calmly but firmly. "I spent Mother's Day cooking for 8 people I'd never met, serving them for hours while being criticized and excluded, cleaning up after them until 2 in the morning, and listening to you and Jessica supervise my work like I was domestic staff who wasn't meeting your standards." Marcus opened his mouth to protest, but I continued before he could speak. "I worked until 2 o'clock in the morning on Mother's Day, Marcus. 2 in the morning. While you and Jessica sat on my couch giving me directions about how to wash wine glasses and pointing out spots I'd missed on serving platters. Do you understand how that felt?" Now he looked genuinely confused, like this was the first time he was considering my perspective at all. "Mom, we're family. Families help each other out. You've always liked hosting and you're so good at it." That response showed me exactly how deep this problem went. In Marcus's mind, my serving everyone else wasn't sacrifice or effort. It was just my natural role in the family hierarchy. "Marcus, there's a difference between helping family and being used by family. Yesterday, I wasn't your mother being honored on Mother's Day. I was free labor being taken advantage of by people who showed me no respect or gratitude." I pulled out my notes and started giving him specific examples because I realized he genuinely didn't seem to understand what had happened. "When Jessica's mother said I was at least useful for something, you said nothing. When Jessica announced that the hostess is supposed to do all the work while everyone else enjoys the party, you agreed with her. When your nephew spilled juice on my grandmother's tablecloth and Jessica called me dramatic for being upset, you told me not to make a scene." With each example, I watched Marcus's face change as he started to understand the scope of what I'd experienced. But I wasn't finished. "You introduced Jessica's family to my home by telling them I didn't mind cleaning up because it made me feel useful. You allowed them to criticize my cooking, my wine choices, my house, and my reactions to their children's behavior. And then at 2 in the morning, you sat in my living room while I cleaned your guests' messes and told me I'd missed spots." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time, really seeing me as a person with feelings and dignity, rather than just a resource for his convenience. I worked 2 jobs to put you through college. I continued, my voice still calm but getting stronger. I sacrificed my social life, my dating opportunities, my own dreams to make sure you had every opportunity to succeed. I did that gladly because I love you and I wanted the best for you. But somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing those sacrifices as gifts and started seeing them as what you were entitled to. Finally, Marcus spoke and his voice was small and shaky. Mom, I didn't realize. I didn't think about it from your perspective. That's exactly the problem, Marcus. You didn't think about my perspective at all. You didn't think about how it would feel to work all day preparing a meal for people who then criticized it. You didn't think about how it would feel to be excluded from conversations in my own home. You didn't think about how it would feel to clean up after your guests until 2 in the morning while being supervised like an employee. I could see tears starting to form in his eyes, and that gave me hope that maybe finally he was beginning to understand. But here's what I need you to really hear, Marcus. This isn't just about yesterday. This has been building for 2 years. Ever since you started dating Jessica, you've gradually stopped treating me like your mother and started treating me like your convenience store. Need a babysitter? Call Mom. Need a free venue for dinner? Use Mom's house. Need someone to clean up after your girlfriend's family? Mom will handle it. The tears were flowing freely now, and Marcus was struggling to speak. Mom, I'm so sorry. I never meant. I love you so much. You're the most important person in my life. If I'm the most important person in your life, I replied, then you need to start treating me that way. Love isn't just a feeling, Marcus. It's a behavior. And your behavior yesterday didn't show love. It showed that you take me for granted. Then I delivered the ultimatum that I'd been building up to all afternoon. I will not accept being treated with disrespect anymore, not by you, not by Jessica, not by anyone. If you want to have a relationship with me going forward, it needs to be based on mutual respect and genuine appreciation. I will not be your unpaid caterer, your free cleaning service, or your emotional support system if you're not willing to support me in return. Marcus broke down completely at that point. The man sitting across from me wasn't the entitled person who'd supervised my dishwashing the night before. He was my son, devastated by the realization of what he'd become and what he'd almost lost. Mom, please, he said through his sobs. I can't lose you. You're all I have left of Dad. I know I've been terrible, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but please don't give up on me. I'll change, I promise. I'll be better. For the first time in the conversation, I reached out and took his hand. Marcus, I'm not giving up on you, but I am giving up on accepting treatment that diminishes my dignity. If you want to change, I'll support that change. But the change has to be real, and it has to be consistent, and it has to start with you understanding that I deserve better than what you've been giving me. We talked for 2 more hours that day, really talked about respect and boundaries and what our relationship needed to look like going forward. When Marcus finally left my house that evening, we both knew that everything had changed between us. The question was whether it had changed for the better, or whether this was the beginning of the end. 3 months have passed since that conversation in my living room, and I can honestly say that both Marcus and I are completely different people than we were on that devastating Mother's Day. The changes didn't happen overnight, and they weren't always smooth, but they were consistent and genuine. Marcus started calling me twice a week again, not because he needed something, but because he wanted to check on me and share what was happening in his life. Our conversations became actual exchanges rather than him talking while I listened and agreed. The first real test came 2 weeks after our talk, when Marcus asked if he could bring Jessica over for dinner. My immediate instinct was to say yes and start planning a big meal, but instead I paused and thought about what I actually wanted. I'd love to have dinner with you, I told him, but I'd prefer if we kept it simple. Maybe I'll make pasta, and you can bring a salad and dessert. And Marcus, I need you to make it clear to Jessica that this is my home, and I expect to be treated with respect in it. I could hear the surprise in his voice, but also something that sounded like relief. Of course, Mom. That sounds perfect. That dinner was a turning point in many ways. Marcus helped me cook and clean up. He made sure I was included in every conversation. When Jessica made a comment about my decorating being dated, Marcus immediately redirected the conversation and later privately told her that those kinds of comments weren't acceptable. But the biggest change came about a month later, when Marcus had to make a choice between maintaining his new relationship with me and keeping Jessica happy. Jessica hadn't taken well to Marcus's new boundaries. She was used to having unlimited access to my time and services, and she didn't appreciate suddenly having to ask permission or show gratitude for my help. She started pressuring Marcus to go back to the old dynamic, telling him I was being manipulative and trying to control him. The confrontation came when Jessica suggested hosting her birthday party at my house with me, providing all the food and service, just like the old days. When Marcus told her that wasn't how things worked anymore, that any party at my house would need to be a collaborative effort with shared responsibilities, Jessica gave him an ultimatum. "It's your mother or me," she said. "I'm not going to be in a relationship where your mom gets to dictate how we spend our time and who we associate with." Marcus called me that night crying harder than I'd seen him cry since his father died. "She wants me to choose," he said. "Jessica says I can't have both of you in my life because you're trying to control me." My heart broke for him, but I also felt proud of the man he was becoming. The old Marcus would have chosen Jessica, and then expected me to just accept whatever treatment he offered. The new Marcus was actually struggling with the choice, which meant he finally understood the value of what we'd rebuilt together. "Marcus," I told him, "I can't make this choice for you. But I will say this, a woman who loves you won't ask you to choose between her and having a healthy relationship with your mother. She'll want you to have all the love and support in your life that you can get." He broke up with Jessica that weekend. It wasn't easy for him, and I know he grieved the relationship, even though it wasn't healthy. But he also started dating again about 6 weeks later, and the woman he's seeing now, Sarah, is everything Jessica wasn't. She's kind to me, respectful of our relationship, and genuinely interested in being part of our family, rather than replacing it. The real proof of how much our relationship had healed came this past Mother's Day. Instead of me hosting and serving, Marcus made reservations at a beautiful restaurant downtown. He picked me up in a car he'd had detailed, brought me flowers from the florist, rather than grabbed from a gas station, and spent the entire afternoon treating me like the honored guest I should have been the year before. During lunch, he brought up the previous year without me having to mention it. "Mom," he said, "I've been thinking a lot about last Mother's Day, and I need you to know how ashamed I am of how I treated you. I was so focused on impressing Jessica's family that I completely forgot the whole day was supposed to be about celebrating you." The maturity in his voice, the genuine remorse, and the evidence of real self-reflection showed me that my son had truly grown from our painful experience. "I also need you to know," he continued, "that everything good about who I am, I learned from you and Dad. And when I lost sight of that, when I started treating you badly, I wasn't just hurting you. I was becoming someone Dad would be ashamed of, and someone you didn't raise me to be." We both cried a little over our lunch that day, but they were healing tears rather than tears of pain. As I reflect on this whole experience now, I realize that sometimes the people we love most need to hear our no before they can find their way back to treating us with love. I spent years enabling Marcus's bad behavior because I thought that was what good mothers did. I thought sacrifice and acceptance were the same as love. But real love, I've learned, sometimes requires difficult conversations. It requires standing up for your own dignity so that the people you care about can learn to be their best selves. When I finally refused to accept poor treatment, I gave Marcus the opportunity to become the man I'd always hoped he could be. The boundary I set that day saved our relationship. If I'd continued accepting disrespect, we would have eventually reached a point where the resentment and hurt feelings made it impossible to repair what we'd lost. By demanding better, I gave us both the chance to build something stronger. I think about my grandmother's tablecloth, sometimes the one that got stained that terrible Mother's Day. I was able to get most of the stain out with some professional cleaning, but there's still a faint mark where the grape juice hit the fabric. I've decided to keep it that way, not as a reminder of the pain, but as a symbol of how something precious can be damaged and still remain beautiful and valuable. My relationship with Marcus has that faint mark too, the memory of how badly things went wrong. But like the tablecloth, we're still here, still valuable, still worth preserving. And maybe we're even stronger now, because we survived the test and came out better on the other side. The most important lesson I want to share with anyone who might be going through something similar is this: respect isn't given automatically because you're family. It's earned by how you treat family members. And if you're not receiving the respect you deserve, it's not selfish to ask for it. It's necessary. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone you love is to refuse to enable their worst behaviors. Sometimes saying no to being mistreated is actually saying yes to helping them become better people. And sometimes the conversations we're most afraid to have are exactly the conversations that can save the relationships we care about most. If this story resonates with your own experiences, I hope it gives you the courage to have those difficult conversations. I hope it reminds you that you deserve to be treated with dignity by everyone in your life, especially by the people who are supposed to love you most. And I hope it shows you that it's never too late to rebuild a relationship on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine care. What about you? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to choose between keeping peace and demanding respect? How did you handle it, and what did you learn from the experience? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Hit that like button if this story touched your heart, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about family relationships and finding the courage to stand up for yourself. Share this with someone who might need to hear that they deserve better treatment from the people in their lives. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, you teach people how to treat you by what you accept. Make sure you're teaching them that you deserve nothing less than love and respect.